It was one of the most shocking crimes in Wales. The Clydach murders.
It was the most horrendous thing that I've ever seen.
Mandy Power, her elderly mother Doris, and Mandy's children, Katie and Emily, were murdered in their own home, and the house set on fire.
We kicked the door a few times and it did give way. I looked in and it was just thick with smoke.
David Morris was found guilty of the horrific killings. He later had his convictions quashed, but was again found guilty at a second trial.
Today we know that the evil person responsible for this will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Morris has spent more than 19 years in jail, but has always protested his innocence.
Is there anything you would like to say about the murders of those 4 people?
I don't know nothing about the murders.
Tonight we reveal potential new evidence and examine questions about the safety of David Morris's convictions for the Clydach murders.
We have an elimination sample from him to compare directly, and it doesn't match his profile.
Were these the 2 men that you saw that night?
Yeah, I'm 100% convinced they are.
Stop here, this is where I seen him.
Just here?
Just here, where the car is now. And I've seen him perfectly.
There are doubts in my head. I think there are serious questions that need to be asked about this case.
Hello, I don't know if it's been reported, but there's a house fire in Calvin Road in Clydach.
There's a fire in the upstairs bedroom.
I've just noticed the smoke coming out of the neighbour's house.
Police in Swansea say a woman, her mother and her 2 daughters were beaten to death before their house was burned down.
The atrocity sent shockwaves throughout the community, and South Wales Police launched a huge murder inquiry.
It is an horrific incident. There's somebody that must know who's done this dreadful act. There's no doubt that the person who's committed this crime was heavily bloodstained.
Finally, 3 years after the brutal killings, local labourer David Morris was convicted of the murders. He was given 4 life prison sentences. Ever since he was found guilty, the victims' families have always believed he was responsible. David Morris has always maintained he wasn't responsible for the brutal killings here at Kelvin Road. There's no DNA or fingerprint evidence linking him to the crime. No witnesses who can place him here at the scene. And he says no reason for him to have carried out the murders. Morris's family have been behind a campaign to prove his innocence, and that campaign has been gathering momentum, including more than 20,000 supporters on social media.
Without no evidence, we've got nothing. He'll be in there to the day he dies.
It's obvious, it's all there in front of you. Just because he had a criminal past, it was an easy target.
Well, obviously, I love my dad, but it's not out of blind faith because he's my dad. There has never been any part of my mind that's ever wavered from knowing that he's innocent, and the evidence just isn't possible.
The murders had a devastating effect on the wider community and, of course, on the victims' family and friends in Clydach.
As soon as you mention that name, it would have to be in relation to the murders. I imagine that it's divided the community. I just really struggled with it,
Did the community struggle as well?
Yes. Yeah, we were upset. The funeral was, it was a huge turnout there, and it just gets me upset now.
Rob Wachowski lived opposite the family and had a brief relationship with Mandy.
Did you love having the face painting done.
Yeah, the characters really come out there, don't they?
There was always people back and forward to that house, and she had family just not far away. They were always looking after each other, definitely. And it was good that their grandmother was with them, because it just showed that they were close-knit.
The victims were savagely beaten in their own home with a metal pole, and there'd been attempts to burn the house down. Doris Dawson was aged 80. She had health problems and walked with the aid of a frame. Her family described her as well-respected, kind, and a strong character. She lived with and was cared for by one of her daughters, Mandy Power, who was 34. She was said to have had a fantastic personality and loved life. Mandy and her ex-husband had 2 daughters, Katie, aged 10, and Emily, who was 8. The motive for killing the family in such a brutal way has always been one of the keys to solving this horrific crime. So you don't find it odd that not more was seen on the night, no?
No, I was here last night and it was very dark.
Mike Berry is a forensic psychologist who's assisted police forces in high-profile killings, including the murder of Geraldine Polk in Cardiff. We asked him to examine the files and evidence in the Clydach murders.
It's very, very unusual. To have 4 women killed in their family home is extremely rare. We're talking handful of cases throughout the world. The whole family were very vulnerable. And that says something about the mentality or the ethos of the killer.
It's widely believed the killer didn't plan the attacks beforehand because the murder weapon, a metal pole, belonged at the property and hadn't been brought to the scene.
We know that the killer used a lot of violence. In fact, with Mandy, it was overkill, which again, to me, suggests there's a personal connection. You don't do that kind of killing unless you have a reason, and the reason is personal. The attack on Mandy shows that she was the target. The girls, I think, to use that awful expression, collateral. I think the motive for murder here is anger. The killer clearly is angry with Mandy by the amount of violence the killer used on her.
The murders took place in Clydach, a large village just north of Swansea. It was the night of Saturday, June the 26th, 1999, and the early hours of Sunday the 27th at 9 Kelvin Road. That night, David Morris had been drinking here at the New Inn on the outskirts of Clydach. He admitted drinking about 8 pints of lager, and the jury was told he'd taken the illegal drug amphetamine. The prosecution said that Morris was in an angry mood that night after a row involving his girlfriend inside the pub. It was claimed that Morris left here and went to Kelvin Road to have sex with Mandy Power. And when she rejected him, he exploded into a violent rage. Witnesses say that Morris left the pub at about 11:30 that night. From the pub, it's approximately half a mile to Kelvin Road, a walk of about 15 minutes along the main road. The prosecution suggested that Morris would also have known his way along a quieter route by the river, where he wouldn't have been noticed. Mandy Power had been babysitting that evening, and she and her daughters were dropped home by taxi at 11:48. If, as the prosecution claims, Morris left the pub and walked to Kelvin Road, he would have arrived just minutes before Mandy and her daughters returned home. So not only are timings critical, it's important to try and understand who was killed first. 21 years ago, one of the first forensic scientists to arrive at the scene was Claire Galbraith.
It was a particularly chaotic and violent crime scene. We were trying to work out what's happened at the crime scene. Perhaps we could identify a weapon. Maybe we can get some indication of who the offender might have been.
Claire Galbraith was one of the few expert witnesses to actually express an opinion on who was killed first, and it was the murder weapon which provided the evidence.
When we got upstairs on the top landing, I actually found a pole which was about, well, it was over 1 metre long, which was blood-stained. Later examination showed that it was stained with the blood of Amanda and the 2 children. And the injuries were consistent with that having been used to beat all 3 of them and also Doris. The fact that there was no blood identifiable on the pole, which we could attribute to Doris, may mean that she was killed first and that any blood of hers on the pole was subsequently removed as the pole was used in other ways.
We've discovered a report prepared for South Wales Police by another expert who says he also believes that Doris was killed first, but he wasn't called to give evidence in court. I'm going to meet one of the founders of the Crime and Justice Research Centre at the University of Winchester. Brian Thornton has been examining the Clydach murders for 10 years.
One of the most significant experts was somebody who looked at the behaviour of the killer. He was absolutely emphatic on this. He was absolutely certain. He said that Doris Dawson had died first and that the killer waited in the house.
Brian Thornton says the importance of determining who was killed first wasn't examined in court. He says it's critical to being able to establish if Morris had the time to carry out the killings.
There's 2 areas that make us very confident that Doris died first. First of all is the murder weapon. The second part of it is, in terms of the sequence, we know that Doris was upstairs in bed. And then what the forensic scientists have worked out is that somebody has come into her bedroom and for whatever reason has killed Doris in her bed. But in the process of killing Doris, the killer has smashed a light bulb in the bedroom, which has caused at least the top floor of the house to go dark because it's been fused.
Brian says the forensic evidence pointed to the killer having gone into the children's bedroom, removing a TV from a chair and placing it on a bed, and then taking that chair downstairs to the bathroom. The killer stood on the chair in order to reach the fuse box and change a fuse to get the lights back on, and then waited. Why is that timescale so critical?
It means that it's nearly impossible for Morris to have done it. He left the pub at 11:30. Mandy and the girls came back just before 12. It means that he will have had to walk to the 9 Kelvin Road, killed Doris, changed the fuses. He'll have to have done all these things. It's impossible. There simply isn't enough time to do that.
What is the significance of that?
It means that this person who went there knew that house intimately. You have to remember that he had 2 trials. He had 2 defence teams. And for some reason, the defence teams didn't deal with this.
There are also questions about whether Morris would have been capable of those actions if he was high on drink and drugs.
We know the killer was quite methodical in setting out the fuse box and sorting that out. It hardly gives the impression that he was high with anger and emotions and then suddenly comes down and becomes very methodical in what he's doing.
Another important time on the night appears to be 1:45. A neighbour told detectives she'd seen someone actually entering 9 Kelvin Road, but significantly, that person was never identified.
I heard a vehicle come from Gatlionin Road, across the road, and it sounded like a very heavy diesel vehicle, and I heard it stopped and then the door slammed.
Neighbour Rosemary Jones says the car pulled over outside the house and someone got out.
And me, now nosy, got out of bed, and as the window was open, I could hear the handle of the door going. I thought, oh, somebody's gone in there. Within seconds, the light went on in the front room, and then the light went on upstairs on the landing. And of course, the light shone into the hall, and with that, I saw the shape of somebody's head.
She told police what she'd seen the very next day, and they made repeated appeals for the person who'd entered the house and the car driver to come forward. But they were never identified. Witnesses recall smelling smoke coming from the general direction of Kelvin Road at about 1:30 on the Sunday morning. But it wasn't until 4:30 that the alarm was raised.
Hello, I don't know if it's been reported, but there's a house fire in Kelvin Road in Clydach.
There's a fire in the upstairs bedroom.
I've just noticed the smoke coming out of the neighbour's house.
Around 4:30, I heard a bang and didn't think much of it.
Rob Wachowski lived opposite number 9 and had been woken up by his young son in the early hours.
I looked across the road and there was smoke coming out from the back garden. I thought, right, I'll ring Mandy up. So I tried her mobile, that went to answer machine. Tried the house phone, no answer. So I went across the road, and when I went round to the back, I looked in the kitchen, and the kitchen was ablaze, completely ablaze. There was another guy with me then, and we said, well, let's try and get in. So we kicked the door a few times, and it did give way.
Rob was beaten back by the intensity of the blaze, but within minutes, fire crews were at the scene.
They arrived, and I telling them the kids are upstairs, and Annie's at the back. But they went straight towards the kitchen. I'm just screaming, no, they're upstairs. Next thing I can really remember then is talking to the fireman, because by then the ambulance was there, had been there, and the fireman said they were dead. You know, all of them were dead.
Four fires were started in the house after the murders. Doris's body had newspaper placed around it, and the killer tried to set fire to her. It's believed that was started between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. There was also a blaze in Mandy's bedroom, which was probably started at a similar time. In the living room, there was a small fire where a cloth had burnt on a table, which had 2 pictures of the girls on it. The prosecution claimed the fires were set to destroy evidence, but Professor Berry disagrees.
I suspect that having killed Doris, Mandy and the 2 girls, that wasn't enough. They had to destroy the house as well. And that's actually quite common in these kind of murders. I think that the fire setting was not to get rid of evidence. I think it was quite clearly to destroy the house. They've killed the mother, they've killed the grandmother, the children, they've burned the house down and wiped them off the face of the earth.
The most destructive fire had been set in the kitchen. Experts say that was started between 3:30 and 3:45 in the morning. Not only had the killer started a number of fires in the house following the attacks, they also spent some time creating a disturbing scene. After Mandy was killed, she was defiled with a vibrator. She'd also been moved to the bathroom and her body apparently washed.
That's kind of very symbolic of cleansing the soul almost. It's just some element of respect.
It was intimate then?
Intimate, without any question. It's an intimate act. So it could be that kind of final farewell. But it doesn't match the violence and everything else unless there was an element of remorse at the end. But there doesn't appear to be, because she's left very much exposed, naked. What we've got is several emotions running parallel with each other.
A watch was found on Mandy's wrist, but it may have been placed there after she was attacked.
That again is symbolic of closure, and I see that in many ways. This is attitude of closure in the case.
And the attempts to destroy the pictures of the girls and set fire to Doris's body appears to follow a pattern of behaviour by the killer.
It was symbolic, no question about it. They could have set fire to that room much more efficiently.
Professor Berry doubts whether Morris had such a close relationship with any of the victims to carry out such symbolic actions. Added to that, his drunken state.
I'm not convinced that it's somebody high on drugs or alcohol particularly. I don't think somebody would have been that drunk and then carried out all those actions. And the thing that convinces me of that is putting a watch on. If you were drunk and you'd be a bit more impulsive, there wouldn't be this symbolism.
Who would have known about the significance of these things? Certainly not David Morris. David Morris wouldn't have known that these items in the house and the way they were displayed and presented, that they were significant.
Was that explored at either of the trials, really?
Strangely it wasn't. I think it was partly because people couldn't entirely explain it. Nobody could really understand it.
The Clydach killings in June 1999 would become the biggest murder inquiry ever undertaken by South Wales Police. Detectives quickly learnt that Mandy Power had been having a lesbian relationship with former police officer Alison Lewis. The Lewises became the main focus of their inquiries. Police spent months investigating Alison, her husband Stephen, a serving police officer, and his twin brother Stuart, also an officer with the South Wales Force. They even went as far as bugging Alison and Stephen's family home. In July 2000, the three Lewises were arrested. Alison and Stephen on suspicion of murder, and Stuart for perverting the course of justice. Craig Hooper is a journalist who covered the murders and Morris's first trial.
One of the things that the police always do is look at relationships. Who's the closest to them? And this is what they did in this situation.
What about Alison and Stephen? What were their alibis on the night of the murder?
Their alibi was that they were lying fast asleep next to each other in the marital bed. I believe that Alison had already sought legal advice about getting a divorce, but they've always maintained that Stephen didn't know about the affair until Alison told him the day after the murders.
Police were also told of claims that Stephen had threatened his wife's lover.
One of the neighbours of Mandy had given evidence to say that Stephen had been outside once and had said something to the effect of "stay away from my wife or I'll kill you," which he said it was a joke. He didn't realise they were having an affair.
Stephen's twin brother, acting Inspector Stuart Lewis, had been on patrol in the Swansea area that night, and he was the most senior officer to arrive at the scene after the alarm was raised.
It was a while after putting the fire out that they realised it was a murder, but I think any serving police officer would probably tell you that what happened was bizarre. He wasn't there for long, I think 8 minutes. Then he left the scene. It was clearly a horrendous situation. But what he didn't do is preserve the scene. It made the police look at themselves and look at their own serving officers as potential suspects in this case.
It's also disputed whether Stuart Lewis reported the deaths as suspicious. In addition, Stuart Lewis's logbook for that night went missing, and he didn't fill in his pocketbook until the Monday. He never gave evidence in court, but in police interviews claimed he was on general patrol between 10 past midnight and 2 in the morning. On the night of the murders, there were no sightings of David Morris near to Kelvin Road. But we've spoken to two witnesses whose testimony, if true, raises questions that have never been fully investigated about the whereabouts of Stephen and Stuart Lewis that night. A former taxi driver has claimed that he distinctly remembers seeing two men in Clydach after dropping off a fare in the early hours of the Sunday.
The only reason I've come forward again, I walked through this park 2 weeks ago and there's a poster displayed on a post that evidently it just brought it all home again, you know.
So this has been nagging at you for years?
Yeah, it has, yeah. I suppose the back of my mind it has, yeah.
And this was
And that's the taller guy that I saw that morning when I was taxiing. I came back down Vardray Road. There were two blokes walking towards me on the pavement next to the taxi, my side. And what struck me was they were very, very similar. Both dark hair, sort of cropped, very, very similar features.
So how far were they away from what, of course, then latterly transpired to be the murder scene, Kelvin Road?
A couple of minutes away, I suppose.
And what time in the morning was this?
It was gone too, I can't be precise. Perhaps 2:30 in the morning.
The next day, Mike learned of the murders in Clydach and says he called the police.
I phoned Swansea Central, I think it was at the time, and they just took all my details and said that the person who's dealing with it or that team will be in touch. Never heard anything at all.
2 weeks later, he claims he called the police a second time to say he could now identify the two men, having seen their photographs in a newspaper story about the murders. Were these the two men that you saw that night?
Yeah, I'm 100% convinced they are. It's striking, actually. One was slightly taller than the other. That's the taller one, which I believe is Stephen Lewis, and that's the brother, slightly shorter. When their pictures appeared in the press, I realised, you know, it was them that I'd seen that morning, and there was an incident room phone number which I'd contacted and explained what I'd seen and the information I had. He took my details and said that someone dealing with the case would make further contact to arrange to come and take a full statement, and that didn't happen.
We understand that Mike has been recently contacted by detectives in order to investigate his claims. Another witness had previously claimed that she saw Stephen Lewis in Clydach on the night as she was driving home.
Saw someone on the left-hand side. He was quite tall, quite stocky, dark cropped hair.
At about 2:30, Nicola Williams was driving home, and around the corner from Kelvin Road, she says she saw a man she later identified as Stephen Lewis. Her account was disputed in court, and it seems it didn't cause the jury to doubt David Morris's guilt.
He was wearing dark jeans, trousers. It seemed to me like a shiny bomber jacket, and he was carrying a bundle under his arm, quite a large parcel of some sort or kit bag. So I slowed down, and he looked at me, I looked at him.
Miss Williams was able to provide an e-fit for the police, but it was never released to the public. She did attend a video ID parade 15 months later, when she identified the man she'd seen as Stephen Lewis. In court, the prosecution insisted that Miss Williams was mistaken. Another witness has come forward who claims to have also seen a man carrying a bundle that night. John Allen says he was driving near Clydach when he saw a man near to Kelvin Road between 4 and 4:30 in the morning. And you drove out this way back towards Clydach?
Yeah, I came up here, drove that way. The fork is in the road down by there. And then we went towards Clydach.
John Allen says he was on the mountain above Clydach with others in the early hours of the morning.
this is the bend here.
OK.
As I come round the bend down here,
yeah,
there's an entrance here.
Yeah.
Carry on down a little bit.
Yeah.
Stop here. This is where I've seen him. And I've seen him perfectly.
You saw him perfectly, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Was he walking away from Clydach, or was
he was just standing there. In the middle of that road, he was just standing there, looking down. And when I come round the corner, I had to slam on, I would have hit him. Because he was practically on my bonnet.
Do you remember what clothing he had on at all?
He just had like a bomber jacket on, and he was carrying a green tent bag. It's like a sausage, it is, so you keep your kit in and stuff.
And he was carrying this under his arm?
It was under his arm, like, yeah. He wasn't actually carrying it.
John Allen says he continued driving down the mountain road, right past Kelvin Road, where the fire brigade had arrived. But he didn't come forward to say what he'd witnessed at the time. You didn't go to police with information about having seen somebody on the mountain road that night?
No, I didn't.
Why didn't you do that? Be honest with me, were there reasons why you didn't want to go to police with any information that night?
Well, no, not really.
Had you been in trouble with the police yourself?
I've been in trouble with the police, yes, I admit that. And I was a disqualified driver. All right, I've been a bad boy in my time, I admit that. I'm not going to hide it.
2 years later, John says he was in a local supermarket with his girlfriend when he claims he saw again the same man who'd been on the mountain road on the night of the murders.
Now, he seen my girlfriend first, then he seen me. I made eye contact with him, and I know that was him from the mountain road, 100% I know.
Why have you decided to come forward now at this point?
Because it's been on my mind for 20 years. I've got no reason to lie on it. There's no vendetta against police or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? This is just for justice for the community and everybody that was involved.
So, on the night of the murders, a man fitting a similar description had allegedly been seen by 3 separate witnesses near to Kelvin Road in Clydach. Between 2 and 2:30, about half a mile away in the centre of Clydach, a taxi driver claims he saw 2 men who resembled the Lewis brothers. At about 2:30, Nicola Williams was driving home, and around the corner from Kelvin Road, she says she saw Stephen Lewis, although this was disputed in court and it seems was not accepted by the jury. And between 4 and 4:30, John Allen says he saw a man whose description was similar to the man seen by Nicola Williams, wearing a bomber jacket and carrying a kit bag about half a mile away from Kelvin Road. There's no direct evidence linking any of the alleged sightings to the murders. But despite the years that have passed, David Morris's lawyers say these witnesses' accounts should be properly investigated. David Morris's current solicitor is Maslin Merchant, and in his view, the evidence of both John Allen and the taxi driver Mike could be significant.
It's very, very interesting, the accounts that they've given. It's interesting that they describe events and seeing this same individual, or possibly one of 2 individuals, around that area at exactly the right time. Potentially, new witnesses could provide Di with the ground of appeal. New witnesses could get these convictions quashed.
In a statement, Stephen Lewis told us he had no part in the murders. He also said his alibi demonstrates that any witnesses who suggest he was in Clydach on the night were mistaken. Alison has said that she was at home with Stephen and that her husband was in a bed beside her all night. And Stuart Lewis has said he didn't see Stephen or Alison at all that night. The Lewises were under investigation for months, but their arrest didn't follow until more than a year after the murders.
The South Wales Police were under huge pressure, so they really wanted to do this right, which is why I think When they realised that there was a potential suspect were serving police officers, they really went to town to try and build the case, I think, against the Lewises.
After their arrests, they were questioned for 4 days and then released on bail. They continued to be investigated for 6 months, but eventually the Crown Prosecution Service concluded they could not charge them with any offences.
We've been informed that there is insufficient evidence to mount a successful prosecution in connection with the murders.
Detectives in the murder investigation room here at Cocket Police Station in Swansea were back to square one. They'd spent more than a year investigating the Lewises without success. And now they had no prime suspect for the horrific Clydach murders. Murder Squad detectives needed a breakthrough, and they were about to get one from an unexpected quarter.
Morris was a name that was told to the police within 48 hours of the murders as somebody they should be looking at, and it was a name that was put on the back burner, wasn't looked at.
A key piece of evidence found at the murder scene was a gold chain covered in blood. Also key to the investigation was Mandy's private life.
It was when either a former police officer or an off-duty police officer overheard a conversation about somebody who had been working with Di Morris, and Di Morris had said to that work colleague, I think they were doing building work, that he'd had sex with Mandy, and I think he might have mentioned the chain.
This conversation was reported by the off-duty officer to detectives. They also knew that David Morris was the boyfriend of Mandy Jewell, and she had been Mandy Power's best friend.
South Wales police are questioning a man about the murder of 3 generations of the same family. The deaths...
You were arrested this morning at 7:20 a.m, am I right?
Yes.
This interview is for you to give an explanation, an account of anything you know about the murders of Doris Violet Dawson, Amanda Jane Power, Katie Jane Power and Emily Jane Power. Is there anything you would like to say about the murders of those 4 people?
I don't know nothing about the murders.
Morris eventually claimed he'd been in a sexual relationship with Mandy Power, but he didn't tell police this straight away. In his original police statements, he didn't mention any relationship until after his arrest, and when he was questioned about exactly where he'd been in 9 Kelvin Road before the murders.
When have you been in the house, Dave?
Oh, you know, all downstairs, toilet, and upstairs with Mandy once.
Okay, tell me about that occasion then. You've been upstairs with Mandy once, because that hasn't been revealed in your statements before.
No.
You said before, didn't you, that you've never been upstairs in the house?
We had sex.
Okay, so that's a new revelation to us now. Okay, you had a sexual affair, because you've never mentioned this before, have you?
Morris claims he didn't tell police earlier about the sexual relationship because he didn't want his girlfriend, Mandy Jewell, to find out.
How would Mandy Jewell reacted if she knew about this?
Relationship with you and everything.
It wasn't until he gave evidence in court that Morris claimed he'd been at 9 Kelvin Road on the Friday morning, the day before the murders. He says he went there and had sex with Mandy Power. The trouble with that claim is that there's no one really to corroborate the story. And there's conflicting witness evidence about both Morris's whereabouts on the Friday morning and also Mandy Power's. That Friday morning is pivotal because that's when Morris claims to have left his gold chain at the house. He says he left it in the kitchen. But it was found on the floor of Doris's bedroom covered in blood. The only DNA on the chain belonged to Mandy Power. Morris had repeatedly denied the chain was his.
Did you leave that chain at Mandy's house?
No.
On Saturday night?
No. No.
You sure?
And positive, I had no reason to hurt Mandy or the children. I got no possible reason whatsoever. You know, why bloody hell would I do it?
David, is that chain yours?
No, it's not my chain. No. I swear to God it's not my chain. On my children's lives, that's not my chain, no.
Morris continued to lie about the chain because he says he didn't want his girlfriend to know he'd had sex with Mandy Power. He only admitted it was his weeks before the trial. The prosecution claimed that Morris's chain ended up on the bedroom floor following a struggle between him and one of the victims. They brought in an expert to try to prove this.
It is, of course, the weakest link we are looking for.
The expert did not conclude that the chain had been pulled from Morris's neck.
If you read these experts' analysis of the chain, they looked at the chain and they analysed whether the links had been pulled as part of if it had been wrenched from the neck. And so was there a particular type of damage to the chain which indicated that it had been pulled in this way? The experts are absolutely emphatic that there is no damage consistent with it being pulled off the neck. So where is the evidence that it was done and where it was pulled from the neck? It's just not there.
Morris claimed the chain was already broken. The clasp was broken, he said, and he'd used a copper wire to attach both ends of the chain.
The police analysed pictures of Morris wearing the chain, and we know that it was a copper wire was wound through the chain and wound through the clasp. And so if it was ripped from his neck, that copper would still be present.
A copper wire was never recovered from the bedroom. It's unclear why any of this was not explored by the defence at Morris's trials. David Morris may have left his necklace at Kelvin Road in disputed circumstances, but there was no DNA or fingerprint evidence linking him to the scene. But the murderer, whoever it was, did leave another clue: a handprint soaked in blood. The handprint was discovered on the carpet of the living room floor, near to a number of videos which had apparently been searched through, as they too had traces of blood on them.
It would appear that he's placed the hand down all in one go, fingers and palm.
Peter Swan is a handprint expert, and he gave evidence for the defence at David Morris's first trial.
2 specific areas of the palm, down at the bottom. Very important areas. They're fixed, as it were.
Yeah.
They don't move about. So using that as a base, then one can compare palm prints to see if they match or are a physical fit with fingers. We've got the mark on the carpet, we've got the handprint of David Morris. We're trying to make that fit that.
Mr. Swan took the left handprint made in blood and then took Morris's handprint, which is overlaid here in black, for comparison.
You can see quite clearly between the left ring finger and the left little finger, these two here, you've got this distinctive V sign, really, that the fingers don't come into alignment with the fingers on the carpet. This slight deformity of the fingers there, which is giving this wide V-shaped appearance.
So this V shape here makes you believe there's a strong possibility that this handprint, the one that was left at the scene, isn't David Morris's.
That's correct. The handprint of David Morris does not fit the hand mark on the carpet.
The prosecution expert in handprints arrived at a different conclusion, that this could indeed have been David Morris's print. Can you understand that?
He can't have got the orientation correctly. If you don't get the base correct, then you get the fingers obviously pointing in a different direction. Now, whether this has led him to believe that it possibly could have been David Morris's, I don't know.
In Peter Swan's opinion, which he expressed in court, the handprint could not belong to Morris.
It can't be David Morris's, not from the 2 exhibits that I've had to work with. No, can't be.
The expert witness for the prosecution said he could not eliminate David Morris's handprint, along with the handprints of 45 other people provided to him by police. The team working to get Morris's case back to the Court of Appeal believe that forensics could still hold the key.
There was an acceptance both on the prosecution and the defence side that there was no forensics in the house and there was no DNA. So pretty much the defence and the prosecution then largely forgot about the forensics entirely, even though when you look at it now, there's a lot to be learned there.
A leading forensic scientist has been examining the evidence for Morris's team. There was various levels of fire damage afterwards. Smoke damage. What is the effect of that on DNA at the scene?
The smoke in and itself is not something that is going to affect our chances of recovering DNA. The fire and the heat is the thing that will degrade the DNA itself. The DNA technology available now is so much more advanced and sensitive than 20 years ago that we can generate profiles from almost no material whatsoever.
DNA samples were taken from various people in the hope of proving they were present at the scene, or if not, they could be eliminated.
We do know that there are unanswered questions. The tests that have been done have identified DNA that cannot be positively attributed to anyone for whom we have an elimination sample.
And we know that's not David Morris's?
Yes, because we have an elimination sample from him to compare directly, and it doesn't match his profile.
Crucially, a partial male DNA sample was recovered from the murder weapon, a metal pole.
Samples have been recovered from either end where you might ordinarily hold or wield a weapon. But when you think of something of length, it becomes quite clunky to kind of swing a pole which is long, and you might use it in a different way to maybe how you'd use a baseball bat. You might jab it, or you might hold it in the centre.
So you'd like the centre of the pole tested for DNA or other forensic evidence?
If possible.
Another key item found at the murder scene was a white sports sock covered in blood.
So this is a photograph from the crime scene of the sock that was recovered from the bedroom. So you can see it's heavily blood-stained, and the proposition is that this sock was worn as a glove. On the inside, they've taken samples, because if somebody wore it as a glove, that's where their DNA would be. But the blood staining suggests that when the sock was worn as a glove, it was worn inside out.
So if the other side of the sock was tested, what would you expect it to reveal in terms of DNA?
Currently it's untested, and that's where we would expect DNA, if any, from the person wearing it to have been deposited.
She's hopeful that further testing could determine once and for all who was responsible. Another key piece of evidence concerns Morris's alibi. He'd been drinking in this pub on the Saturday night, but what happened after he left is unclear. Morris again changed his story, and his version of events didn't match that of his girlfriend. Morris says he walked from the pub up a shortcut to the flat he shared with his girlfriend Mandy Jewell, a journey which takes about 15 minutes. But after arguing with her in the pub earlier that night, he decided not to go into the flat.
I was walking home, I was like, right, I'm going in, having it out with an allocator, but then when you get to like, your ass goes a bit, you know what I mean? Just like, I'm going in, I was going to be actions like, just like, bollocks, I'll see you in the morning.
Then Morris claims he walked down lanes and a quiet country road towards Swansea for another hour and a half, past Morriston Hospital to Llangavelach roundabout. But instead of carrying on to his parents' house a further 3 miles away, he says he turned around and headed home.
Started pissing down the rain. I was thoroughly soaked. I guess I just sobered up a bit then. I knew I couldn't go back home with my parents, so I went back with them.
So Morris says he arrived back here at his home in Clydach Park at about 3 o'clock in the morning. He says his girlfriend answered the door to him and he put his wet clothes in the washing machine.
I then went back, she opened the door, didn't speak, and I went there.
So you go into the back door?
Yeah.
Did the dogs make a noise or anything?
She opened the door, Mandy opened the door.
Oh, she opened the back door for you, did she? Did she ask you where you'd been?
No, we weren't talking.
That was Morris's alibi, and the only person that could corroborate that was his girlfriend, Mandy Jewell. And she had a different version of events. She originally told police he arrived home between 10:30 and 11 p.m, and she didn't see him when he entered their home. But in court, she said she didn't know what time he arrived home, and she did get up to let him in. Their stories had repeatedly changed. The trial against David Morris lasted 11 weeks. The jury was told that Morris had dozens of previous convictions and he had a tendency towards violence, including against his own girlfriend. On June the 28th, 2002, the jury returned to deliver their verdict.
David Morris is tonight starting 4 life sentences after being found guilty of the Clydach murders.
It has been 3 long and difficult years since Mum, Mandy, Katie and Emily were so cruelly taken from us. And today we know that the evil person responsible for this will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
We are unable to understand the evidence that was presented to the court. We are told by David's lawyers that there are good grounds for an appeal which will be commenced straight away.
In 2005, after a hearing at the Court of Appeal, Morris's 4 convictions for murder were overturned. The appeal court said there'd been a conflict of interest. A year later, Morris faced a retrial at Newport Crown Court, and he was convicted for a second time. What the juries at both of Morris's trials didn't know was that the police had 4 separate profiles of the Clydach killer. Morris didn't fit the profile in one of the reports, and the other 3 are not available to the current defence team. It's not known if Morris fitted any of these other profiles. Having examined the Clydach files, we also asked Professor Berry to build a likely profile of the murderer.
I want to challenge the idea that we always automatically assume that men kill. And so I'd start on the basis that gender could be either male or female. It would have to be somebody physically strong that's got the characteristics of a more mature killer. They know the house well, which means it's somebody who's been in the house lots and lots of times, somebody who felt comfortable there.
There were also no signs of forced entry at the property.
This is somebody known to the family and local. A madly drunken person could have done it, but then there's too much organisation aspects to it, which I think a drunken person would have made an impulsive action and then left.
Professor Berry also considered the likely behaviour of the person responsible after the killings.
I'm looking at somebody that would be able to cope with walking around a house having dead bodies. Now that leads on to the interesting thing about how do you behave after killing. I would expect to see the killer suffering from quite traumatic stress afterwards.
Professor Berry concluded there were a number of people who might have carried out the murders, and he couldn't rule out David Morris as a strong contender. The sheer scale of the first police investigation had been vast. 4,500 statements taken, 8,500 actions by officers, and 4,000 exhibits. It was a huge inquiry, the biggest ever undertaken by the South Wales Force. But not all of that material had been made available to the defence.
We do believe that there was a lot of material that wasn't handed over. But the difficulty with that is we don't know what it is because it wasn't given to us. There's probably files held by the police that would be highly significant to us.
Hundreds of documents were not seen by the defence under court orders called Public Interest Immunity, or PII.
PII is a method by which the prosecution can suppress the disclosure of relevant material in a criminal trial. So it's suppressing material which in principle assists the defence or undermines the prosecution case. It must therefore always be used sparingly.
Simon McKay is a barrister and a leading expert on civil liberties and human rights. He's concerned about the use of PII, which is more commonly used in cases of national security. How often would you expect to see PII applied for in a murder case, however gratuitous the murder?
Disclosure becomes all the more important and acute the more serious the offence, particularly where someone might be facing a life sentence. In those circumstances, it's terribly important that the process is applied rigorously, and you would expect to see it applied fairly infrequently. This case certainly has a significant volume of material that was the subject of a series of public interest immunity applications. And there is not an obvious reason as to why you would expect that to arise. When one looks at the entire context of the case, then it's understandable that one walks away from this case with serious concerns that justice has been done.
South Wales Police says it carried out an extensive investigation and David Morris was twice convicted by a jury. It says it acknowledges the significant impact the case continues to have on the victims' families and the wider community, and it awaits this programme with interest. The Dawson and Power families this week issued statements saying the verdict was the correct one, and they've no doubt the right person is behind bars. David Morris has spent 18 years in jail since his first conviction for the Clydach murders. His 4 life sentences were later reduced, but he was ordered to spend 32 years in prison. Throughout that time, he's always maintained his innocence, and he's hoping that new evidence will get his case back before the Court of Appeal. His defence team are now planning to take the potential new evidence to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the first step in getting any conviction quashed.
The CCRC should prioritise the case and hopefully refer it back to the Court of Appeal.
The threshold that you have to pass is you have to establish that there is fresh evidence, new evidence, essentially evidence that the jury never heard. And this new evidence is going to be right at the heart of the fresh application.
David Morris's family are continuing their efforts to free him, and the public campaign continues to gather momentum.
It does give us hope, but there is always a nagging doubt because we've got excited about things before.
Yeah.
We think this is it, this is going to be the break in the case and everything's going to be all right. And then it's not again. They don't accept it. They don't accept it.
Got absolutely no choice but to keep fighting for him.
Tonight, they hope concerns raised about the safety of Morris's convictions will be heard.
After 20 years, somebody who says that they are not guilty of one murder, let alone 4, is to a very large extent keeping himself in prison. And the reality is that as long as he says he is innocent, he will not be released and he will die in prison.
There are doubts in my head. The information that we have, that he's walked from the pub, gone to kill Doris, waited, and then killed Mandy and then the 2 girls, That doesn't fit with the character that he's portrayed. I think there are serious questions that need to be asked about this case.
I think that given a fair wind and a reasonable hearing, I think that we've every chance. I think David Morris will eventually be proved innocent, and people will realise that this is a miscarriage of justice.
The murders of 3 generations of the same family has left its mark on the community of Clydach. Questions have always hung over the case, and until the new information is properly investigated, there will continue to be a degree of uncertainty.